for its effort. Recommendations accepted during the previous cycle, which reflect the country's commitment to cooperation and its steady progress in the promotion and protection of human rights. In spirit of constructive dialogue, Tajikistan would like to offer the following recommendations. 1. To continue constructive cooperation with the UN human rights mechanism and implementing programs aimed at reducing poverty and inequality. 2. To take effective measures to mitigate and prevent the negative impact of climate change on the enjoyment of human rights. 3. Continue to support women, ensuring the protection of their rights and legitimate interests and enhancing their social and economic participation. In conclusion, Tajikistan wishes the delegation of Mongolia every success in its review. I thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thailand commends Mongolia's efforts to enhance inclusive and quality education for all, such as the home-based school preparation program for Hindu communities and the institutionalization of comprehensive sexual education within the national curriculum. We welcome the incorporation of non-discrimination principles based on sexual orientation and gender identity in its criminal code and revised labor law. Thailand recommends that Mongolia 1. Ensure effective implementation of shelter regulations, funding mechanisms, and social protection measures for trafficking victims. 2. Continue efforts to narrow the urban-rural education gap by strengthening infrastructure, improving curricula, and ensuring safe, inclusive learning environments for all children, including those with disabilities and from herders and families. And 3. Combat stereotypes and prejudice against LGBTI+ persons and consider legal recognition and protection for same-sex couples. We wish Mongolia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Togo.
Merci, Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Thank you, Vice President. The Togolese delegation would like to wish a warm welcome to the Mongolian delegation, and we thank them for introducing the report. Take note of actions carried out by Mongolia to further promote human rights on its territory, including measures to combat domestic violence and human trafficking, as well as actions to do with independence of the judiciary and of the National Human Rights Commission. However, in a constructive spirit, Togo recommends to Mongolia 1. Ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. 2. Do more to bolster the framework to protect children and to prevent crimes against minors. Togo wishes Mongolia every success in implementing the recommendations stemming from the current review. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. Maintenant, je passe la parole au président.
Thank you. I give the floor to Tunisia.
Thank you, Vice President. Tunisia welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks it for its national report, and we take note of the steps undertaken by the Mongolian government in implementing the previous recommendations in its efforts to protect human rights in practice and in legislation, and its continuing engagement with UN human rights mechanisms. We'd like to also reaffirm the importance of the steps to protect women and to include persons with special needs. And in the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend what follows. Continue efforts to improve health services for women and children, particularly in rural and remote areas, and to continue social care and protection for poorer families. And in conclusion, we'd like to wish Mongolia every success in this UPR.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the delegation of Mongolia for presenting its national report. Ukraine acknowledges the steps taken by the government of Mongolia to protect human rights of its citizens since the last UPR cycle and recommends Mongolia to effectively implement its obligations under the Rome Statute, including executing all requests for cooperation from the International Criminal Court and to carry out arrest warrants against all individuals indicted for crimes within the court's jurisdiction, recognizing that the arrest and surrender of all persons subject to an ICC arrest warrant is a fundamental and unequivocal obligation. Second, take robust measures to eradicate torture and ill treatment, including by adoption legislation to establish an independent mechanism to investigate acts of torture and ill treatment committed by public officials, ensuring that investigators have no institutional or hierarchical link to alleged perpetrators. Guarantee that victims of torture and other ill treatment have an enforceable right to redress, including fair and adequate compensation and rehabilitation in accordance with international human rights standards. And fourth, repeal policies and practice that impose undue or excessive restrictions on peaceful assemblies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. Vice President, my country's delegation would like to welcome the delegation of the Republic of Mongolia and thanks it for presenting the fourth national report, which is a reflection of its continued promotion and protection of human rights. And we'd like to recommend what follows. First of all, continue to implement awareness programs around violence and cyberbullying in such a way as to protect children, including those in rural areas. Secondly, to continue to engage with UN bodies and human rights mechanisms, and we'd like to wish Mongolia every success in this UPR. Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of the UK, United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The United Kingdom commends Mongolia's commitment to democratic principles and the protection of human rights. We are proud of our partnership with Mongolia, grounded in shared democratic values, open societies, a deepening economic relationship, and commitment to upholding international law. We welcome anti-discrimination legislation protecting LGBT+ individuals and encourage Mongolia to build on this important step through stronger enforcement of this legislation and the adoption of more inclusive policies. We also recognize positive steps taken to tackle domestic violence and encourage Mongolia to take further action by improving police training, coordination, and support services. We urge further progress on guaranteeing an independent media and freedom of expression, and sustained action on anti-corruption, judicial independence, and the fair and transparent distribution of mineral wealth remain essential to strengthening public trust. We recommend that Mongolia, 1, ensure media freedom and civil society protection by repealing restrictive laws and actively safeguarding journalists from harassment and imprisonment. 2, strengthen anti-discrimination protections for LGBT+ individuals through implementing legislation and developing professional codes of conduct. And 3, improve domestic violence responses by further expanding police training, victim support services, and public awareness campaigns. Thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Uruguay.
Gracias, señor. Thank you, Vice President. Uruguay welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks it for presenting its report. We hail the efforts undertaken to implement the recommendations from the third UPR. Constructively, we recommend the following. 1, ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. 2, adopt comprehensive legislation against all forms of discrimination, prohibiting explicitly discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 3, undertake greater efforts to achieve universal access to quality education at all levels, with a particular focus on the basic needs of children with disabilities. And lastly, guarantee the availability and affordability of information and sexual and reproductive health services for all. Uruguay wishes Mongolia success at this fourth review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have a video from the delegation of Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Chair. Uzbekistan warmly welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks for the presentation of the national report under the fourth cycle of UPR. We commend the measures taken by the government of Mongolia to promote and protect human rights Since its last review, a note of appreciation is constructive cooperation with the relevant UN treaty bodies and special procedures. In a spirit of constructive cooperation, Uzbekistan makes the following recommendations. First, to continue effort in combating domestic and gender-based violence. Second, to take further targeted measures to promote the rights and interests of vulnerable groups, including children, women, persons with disabilities, and older persons. We wish the delegation of Mongolia every success in its review. I thank you.
Now I invite the distinguished representative of Vanuatu.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Vanuatu welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its national report. Vanuatu notes with appreciation Mongolia's growing recognition of climate change as a cross-cutting human rights and development issue. Mongolia's commitment under its national contribution to the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emission by 22.7% by 2030 is a positive anchor for mitigation efforts. Mongolia has taken steps to embed climate resilience in its development planning. Vanuatu respectfully encourages Mongolia to further strengthen its climate human rights interface by considering the following recommendations. 1. Phase out coal and expand renewable energy with clear targets. 2. Support headers and rural communities with early warning systems, income diversification, and sustainable pasture management. 3. Strengthen monitoring and climate finance to ensure transparent, inclusive implementation. Vanuatu wishes the delegation of Mongolia a successful UPR. I thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
Gracias.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation from Mongolia and we thank it for its valuable presentation. We appreciate cooperation with the UPR mechanism and we believe that voluntary mechanisms and not those imposed are the ones that yield greatest results for human rights. We acknowledge the headway made by the country in terms of human rights. In particular, measures aimed at protecting vulnerable groups, including children, adolescents, women, persons with disabilities, and the elderly, by adopting various public policies and legal frameworks such as the Law on the Protection of Childhood, the Parliament Programme, the Law to Combat Domestic Violence, and the amendment of the Law on the Elderly. We urge the state to continue to implement these and other public policies to fully guarantee the promotion and protection of human rights in the country, including the right to development based on their national realities. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1. Strengthen the Support Centre for Employment of Persons with Disabilities, providing it with appropriate resources to provide training to persons with disabilities, thereby facilitating their integration into society. And 2. Continue to implement specific measures to raise awareness and ensure gender equality in all spheres of public life. Lastly, we wish every success of this 4th UPR. Thank you very much, sir.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Vietnam warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Mongolia and thanks it for the presentation of the national report. We commend Mongolia for strengthening the implementation of its child protection law, establishing child protection teams in all public kindergartens and schools, and creating child and family social worker positions nationwide. We also appreciate Mongolia's notable progress in promoting inclusive education, as reflected in the steady increase in the number of children with disability accessing education. In a constructive spirit, Vietnam recommends that Mongolia, 1. Strengthen the social security system to meaningfully reduce poverty and provide adequate support to vulnerable and economically disadvantaged households. 2. Enhance education standards to ensure equitable access to quality educational services for all children in rural, remote, and urban areas. 3. Continue efforts to reduce youth unemployment and underemployment through targeted vocational training and employment support programs. We wish Mongolia every success in its UPR process. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Armenia warmly welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks for the presentation of its national report. Armenia commends Mongolia's continued commitment to promoting human rights through institutional strengthening and inclusive policy reforms. We note with appreciation that progress made in expanding access to education through digital platforms, enhancing child protection systems, and improving accessibility and employment opportunities for persons with disabilities. We further commend the government's efforts to advance gender equality and prevent domestic and gender-based violence. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Armenia recommends Mongolia: 1. Continue developing comprehensive and anti-discrimination legislation aimed at prohibiting all forms of discrimination, encompassing both direct and indirect practices. 2. Strengthen legal and institutional safeguards to ensure full protection of freedom of expression and media independence. And 3. Continue efforts to promote women's participation in decision-making at all levels, particularly in politics and the judiciary. We wish Mongolia every success in its current review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the delegation for their presentation. Australia welcomes Mongolia's commitment to democracy and progress on human rights protections. Australia welcomes the passage of laws protecting human rights defenders and strengthening personal data protection, and increased women's representation following the 2024 national elections. Australia notes legislation which restricts civic space and remains concerned by rates of sexual and gender-based violence and the lack of protection for LGBTQIA+ persons. Australia recommends that Mongolia, 1, implement a comprehensive sexual and gender-based violence strategy that includes increased funding and training for education, prevention, support services, and justice mechanisms. 2, enforce Article 1.3 of the Criminal Code to protect LGBTQIA+ persons against discrimination. And 3, amend definitions in Article 13.14 of the Criminal Code and law on state and official secrets to protect journalists and human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Austria welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Mongolia and thanks for the presentation. Despite its difficult geopolitical location and the multiple socioeconomic challenges of the past years, Mongolia has steadily pursued its policy to uphold and protect human rights. We commend and value these efforts. However, we are concerned about the lack of addressing issues that have been raised repeatedly in previous UPR cycles. We urge Mongolia to take concrete and sustained measures to resolve these persistent challenges. Austria recommends the following. 1. Ensure that the defamation law is not used to silence critics, human rights defenders, journalists, or bloggers for their legitimate activities. Decriminalize defamation and place it within civil defamation legislation. 2. Effectively implement the law to combat domestic violence and ensure that all involved authorities in the judiciary and police force, as well as social and healthcare workers, receive the necessary training to fulfill the mandates to protect and help the victims. 3. Set up and implement an independent mechanism to investigate all acts of torture and ill treatment and enhance the knowledge and competence of law enforcement officials about human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Azerbaijan.
Mr. Vice President, we warmly welcome the delegation of Mongolia and express our gratitude for the presentation of its national report. We commend Mongolia for the progress achieved in implementing the recommendations from the previous cycle of the UPR. We note with appreciation its efforts to strengthen the protection of vulnerable groups, the introduction of foster family services, and the establishment of specialized courts for family and child matters. We further welcome progress in preventing torture and improving access to education and social welfare, particularly for persons with disabilities and children in rural areas. Azerbaijan offers the following recommendations to Mongolia. 1. Continue strengthening mechanisms to prevent and address violence against women and children, including ensuring adequate resources for shelters and support services. 2. Further enhance the independence and regional presence of the National Human Rights Commission. 3. Continue promoting employment and social inclusion of persons with disabilities through vocational training and accessible infrastructure. We wish the delegation of Mongolia every success in the current UPR cycle. I thank you.
Thank you. I invite the representative of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, Bangladesh welcomes the distinguished delegation of Mongolia to its fourth cycle of UPR. We take note that in 2024, the Parliament of Mongolia adopted a law related to the family and child matters, and a first instance court and an appellate court in family and child matters were established in the capital city in line with the adopted law. In the spirit of constructive cooperation, Bangladesh recommends the following. First, intensify efforts to achieve universal access to education at all levels, including by taking further measures to effectively implement inclusive education. Second, continue to strengthen the legislative and governance framework to prevent and respond effectively to all forms of violence against women and girls. Third, continue to take measures to eliminate trafficking in persons, in particular through addressing persistent shortcomings in the identification of victims and reports of victims. Fourth, continue to take measures in enhancing the representation of Mongolia's success in its review. Okay, thank you, Mr. Bay.
I think I invite the representative of Belgium.
Mr. Vice President, Belgium welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and commends it with the adoption of the law on child protection, labor, and on personal data protection. We also welcome your collaboration with the UN Special Procedures. In a constructive spirit, Belgium recommends to adopt comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation, including a national action plan to eliminate all forms of discrimination, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, protect journalists, media workers, and from acts of harassment and intimidation, promptly investigate all such acts and bring those responsible to justice. Implement effective and comprehensive measures aimed at reducing violence against children, including domestic and sexual violence. I think.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Bhutan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Bhutan warmly welcomes the Mongolian delegation. We commend Mongolia for its concerted effort to strengthen its overall national human rights framework. We laud the implementation of a range of measures to enhance access to education through further development of critical infrastructure such as dormitories and sanitation facilities, as well as targeted capacity building of teachers, caregivers, and parents. We also note with appreciation the efforts to combat and prevent domestic violence and also the adoption of legislation to establish specialized courts in family and child matters. We recommend Mongolia to enhance efforts to expand both the access to quality of education at all levels, with an emphasis on children from households below the poverty line, as well as those living in remote areas. Ensure effective implementation of the recommendations from the impact assessment of the law on combating domestic violence, and to continue strengthening measures to promote women's representation in all spheres. Bhutan wishes Mongolia a successful UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Bolivia.
Gracias, Vice-President.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the distinguished delegation of Mongolia and thank it for presenting their national report and their constructive involvement with the UPR. We hail the actions undertaken in assessing the impact of the law to combat domestic violence and cooperation established with international human rights mechanisms. In a constructive spirit, the plurinational state of Bolivia would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Continue with the work of the Council on Maternal, Child and Reproductive Health with the aim of guaranteeing medical care and medical services, particularly for mothers and children of groups living in rural areas and vulnerable groups. 2. Strengthening legally and financially the National Human Rights Commission in step with the Paris Principles. And 3. Continue leadership to promote better opportunities for populations of landlocked developing countries. Bolivia wishes Mongolia every success in implementing the recommendations that it chooses to accept.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Brazil welcomes the delegation of Mongolia. Brazil praises the legislative determination that stipulated a minimum 30% gender quota for female candidates in the 2024 elections, and we encourage the introduction of similar quotas in all areas where women are underrepresented. We also commend the plan Vision 2050 and related targets aimed at lifting the Mongolian population out of poverty, which should include a revaluation of Mongolia's social security system. In a constructive spirit, Brazil recommends that Mongolia, 1, review national legislation and policies concerning persons with disabilities, aligning them with international human rights standards. 2, increase child labor inspections and adequately fund the inspection regime in order to reduce child labor, particularly in hazardous work, including through technical cooperation with international labor organizations. We wish Mongolia an excellent review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
His participation in this new review. We welcome measures taken by Mongolia to strengthen human rights, particularly the 2021 law on the legal status of human rights defenders. Canada recommends that Mongolia, 1, strengthen funding and the implementation of accommodation services provided for by law to combat domestic violence in order to improve access to safe housing and peoples, LGBTQI+ communities and ethnic minorities, in line with the United Nations Practical Guide to draw up comprehensive legislation to combat discrimination. 3, review Article 13.14 of the Criminal Code and the draft laws on the media so as to do away with vague provisions and guarantee the freedom of expression in accordance with Article 19.3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Canada also encourages Mongolia to enhance coordination and financing to guarantee the right to
Moi, je voulais m'extraire maintenant, donc.
We would now like to give the floor to the representative for
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, President. Chile would like to commend the state of Mongolia for adopting the Action Plan 2023-27 to implement the guiding principles on business and human rights. To move forward with the respect and promotion of human rights, we respectfully recommend that it ratify the Convention on all migrant workers and members of their families, and that it adopt measures to guarantee the freedom of expression, peaceful association and assembly, decriminalize defamation and slander, and ensure the protection of journalists and human rights defenders vis-a-vis reprisals and violence. Strengthen the implementation of the law against domestic violence with sufficient resources, specialized training, and services based on the victims to provide a comprehensive response to violence against women and girls. Strengthen public policies which guarantee equitable access of women to employment and economic opportunities by a comprehensive care system which promotes social and family co-responsibility. Guarantee the effective protection of LGBTI persons vis-a-vis all forms of violence and discrimination, fully strengthening and applying anti-discrimination laws. We wish Mongolia every success at this UPR cycle.
I think now I invite the distinguished representative of China.
Vice President, China commends Mongolia for its achievements in the promotion and protection of human rights since its last review, including the continuous protection of children, women, people with disabilities, the elderly, and other vulnerable groups, concrete measures to prevent torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment, and the modification of domestic laws in line with the international legal instruments. China wishes to make 3 recommendations. 1, continue to improve the legal framework and promulgate policies and measures to protect the rights of the elderly, women, children, and other vulnerable groups. 2, continue to focus on the protection of economic, social, and cultural rights to improve people's welfare. 3, continue to increase the investment in healthcare and improve the quantity and the quality of healthcare services provided. China wishes Mongolia every success in its UPR review. Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Colombia.
Gracias, señor Vice.
Thank you, Vice President. Colombia would like to welcome the distinguished delegation of Mongolia, and we wish them every success at this 4th UPR. And constructively, we recommend the following. 1, step up efforts to promote the effective implementation of the provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights before the national courts. 2, adopt comprehensive legislation against discrimination in public and private spheres, also based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 3, amend national legislation so that the definition of torture is fully adapted to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment and Punishment and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 4, adopt measures to improve knowledge and understanding about laws on privacy of data, rights, and resources available in the case of a violation of privacy. Guarantee and ensure that workers can form trade unions and become members of them, and foster measures to promote women's participation in all spheres in which they are underrepresented or underprivileged. Thank you, Senator.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Costa Rica.
Thank you, Vice President. Costa Rica would like to thank Mongolia for its report, and we commend it on the need in strengthening the National Human Rights Commission. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. Strengthen the legal framework of public policies promoting gender equality, prevent and sanction or punish gender-based violence, and ensure equitable access for women to education, employment, political participation, and sexual and reproductive health services. Bolster the implementation of the law to combat domestic violence through specialized training of judges, prosecutors, police, social workers, psychologists, and staff. Strengthen the effective implementation of guarantees protecting the full exercise of the freedom of expression, press, and access to information, ensuring that journalists, communicators, and human rights defenders can carry out their work with any fear of reprisals. And lastly, guarantee the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment by reducing atmospheric pollution, strengthening environmental regulation, and promoting clean energy, particularly for transport and heating. Lastly, we are very grateful about the information provided as to measures to combat air pollution in Ulaanbaatar, and we wish you a successful implementation of these recommendations.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Croatia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Croatia welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We commend the progress achieved from the last UPR cycle, especially through the revision of the law on the National Human Rights Commission of Mongolia. Croatia recommends the following. 1. Intensify efforts to effectively implement the law to combat domestic violence, including by strengthening support services for women who are survivors of gender-based violence, and ensure that all assistance and services for victims of domestic violence are victim-centered, gender-responsive, and trauma-informed. 2. Identify and address barriers and financial constraints in accessing education for children from low-income households and close the gap in educational attainment between the poor and wealthier segments of the population. And 3. Harmonize all national legislation and policies with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, including by assessing the legal and environmental barriers for persons with disabilities, and ensure the support and assistance necessary to promote the independent living of persons with disabilities and their full social inclusion. Croatia wishes Mongolia successful resistance.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Cuba.
Gracias.
Thank you, Vice President. We would like to welcome the delegation from Mongolia, and we hail the commitment to the UPR. Cuba acknowledges Mongolia's commitment to protecting the rights of the child, and we hail practical measures implemented by the country, such as the establishment of protection teams in all schools,
the provision of school psychologists and the specific budgetary measures taken for child development. We also welcome the holding of dramatic campaigns, mass training of social workers, parents, students, and the development of alternative services to childcare, such as foster families. We also value the active participation of children and young persons through fora, cultural activities, and parliamentary programs for young persons. These initiatives show an inclusive, preventive approach and a participatory approach which guarantees greater well-being of new generations. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1. Consolidate national efforts to prevent and combat domestic violence, with a particular focus on the comprehensive protection of boys, girls, and adolescents who are in a vulnerable situation. 2. Continue to strengthen policies and initiatives aimed at achieving the active participation of women in public, economic, and social life, consolidating the professional or vocational programs and community leadership. 3. Strengthen digital training and inclusive campaigns, as well as the development of accessible tools to prevent online harassment, as well as the exposure of children to harmful content. We wish the country evidence at this review and the implementation of the accepted recommendations.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Vice President. Cyprus welcomes the delegation of Mongolia. Thanks you for this presentation. We acknowledge Mongolia's efforts to advance human rights at the national level and welcome the progress made, particularly the increased investment in social protection and the amendments to gender equality legislation to strengthen women's participation in parliament. Cyprus remains concerned, though, by reports that negative stereotypes, harassment of female politicians, continue to discourage women in political life. Cyprus recommends 1. Promote policies and frameworks that create an enabling environment for women to achieve greater independent and equal access to economic opportunities. 2. Deliver public policies guided by human rights principles and responsive to the diverse needs of youth. 3. Support with dignity, progressively improve their quality of life, especially regarding the right to receive an adequate pension. And 4. Ensure that no one is subjected to arbitrary arrest or detention. We wish Mongolia a successful review.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of Czechia.
The Vice Chairman. Czechia welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks for the comprehensive national report and its active engagement in the UPR process. We commend Mongolia for the efforts to strengthen its human rights framework and to appreciate the measures promoting gender equality and improving access to education for children with disabilities and ethnic minorities. We wish to recommend that Mongolia, first, establish an independent mechanism to investigate allegations of torture and ill treatment, ensuring impartiality and accountability. Second, guarantee freedom of peaceful assembly to ensure that law enforcement responses are proportionate and lawful. Third, protect human rights defenders and journalists from threats and harassment, and ensure that laws are not misused to restrict legitimate activities and restrict freedom of expression and media freedom. Fourth, strengthen efforts to combat domestic, sexual, and gender-based violence, including by ensuring adequate funding for shelters and services, training professionals, expanding survivor-centered approach, and raising public awareness. We wish Mongolia success in its efforts to promote and protect human rights for all. Thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of the Dominican Republic.
Gracias, señor. Thank you, Vice President. The Dominican Republic cordially welcomes the distinguished delegation of Mongolia. We congratulate them for releasing the national report. We welcome normative and institutional progress made toward bolstering protection of human rights, including initiatives to combat GBV, guaranteeing access to justice, particularly for women and persons in situations of vulnerability, promote labour inclusion of persons with disabilities, and foster gender equality at the political level. We welcome efforts geared towards expanding services and support to older persons. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1, promptly and effectively investigate reports of torture and ill treatment. 2, bolster protection and assistance to victims of trafficking, avoiding their criminalisation. 3, adopt special temporary measures to promote substantive gender equality. 4, step up care given to the elderly, especially in rural areas. 5, promote creation of a law on accessibility and a barrier-free environment with the participation of disabled persons organisations. 6, promote a law on sign language and a national plan for its implementation. We wish Mongolia every success. Thank you.
Thank you. I invite now the representative of Estonia.
Vice President. Estonia welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks for the additional information presented today. We welcome the progress Mongolia has made in enhancing women's participation in the labor market, and we encourage continued efforts in this area. We express concern regarding the challenges faced by journalists and human rights defenders, and hence we recommend 2. 1, ensure that all media freedom laws comply with international human rights standards, particularly regarding freedom of expression. 2, ensure that journalists, media workers, human rights defenders, and civil society activists can carry out their activities freely, safely, and independently, both online and offline. 3, expand early childhood and elder care services through increased public funding. And 4, adopt comprehensive legislation to address all forms of gender-based violence and strengthen support systems for survivors. We wish Mongolia a successful debut. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Ethiopia.
Mr. President, Ethiopia warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of Mongolia to the first cycle of the UPR Working Group session. We also extend our appreciation to the delegation for its presentation of its national report and its continued engagement with the Universal Periodic Review process. Ethiopia commends Mongolia for its significant progress achieved in the promotion and protection of human rights. Ethiopia also welcomes Mongolia's continued investment in education and human rights capacity development. In the spirit of constructive engagement and dialogue, Ethiopia recommends Mongolia: 1, continue strengthening social protection system to ensure comprehensive coverage of children, families, and elderly people. 2, continue expanding economic empowerment initiatives that promote entrepreneurship, investment, and sustainable livelihood for youth and persons with disability. 3, continue to strengthen women's participation in leadership and decision-making at all levels. Finally, Ethiopia wishes success to the delegation of Mongolia in its engagement with the UPR Working Group. I thank you.
Je vous remercie. Maintenant, j'ai envie de
France. President France wishes a warm welcome to the delegation of Mongolia. We wish them a successful UPR. France hails Mongolia's efforts to protect the rights of children and on electoral representation of women. France makes the following 5 recommendations. 1, step up the fight against corruption, giving the authorities adequate means for investigation and sanction. 2, establish a collect mechanism on addressing reports of victims of violence and discrimination. 3, pursue efforts to improve handling of complaints in the cases of torture and other forms of ill treatment by bolstering the means independence of the National Torture Prevention Mechanism. 4, protect human rights defenders from attacks, threats, and intimidation, especially by stepping up the wherewithal of the Committee on Human Rights Defenders. And finally, pursue efforts to put an end to violations of human rights linked to environmental damage that being caused. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Lord Gambia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Gambia warmly welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and commends the government of Mongolia for its continued engagement with the Universal Periodic Review process. We recognize Mongolia's progress in expanding education and health services, promoting gender equality, and reinforcing the role of its National Human Rights Commission. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, the Gambia offers the following recommendations. 1, continue efforts to ensure equal and inclusive access to quality education for all children, including those with disabilities and those in rural and nomadic communities. 2, intensify efforts to effectively implement the law to combat domestic violence and strengthen support services for victims of gender-based violence. 3, ensure that laws and procedures governing the registration of religious organizations are applied consistently and without discrimination, particularly for minority religious groups. 4, consider ratifying the International Convention on the Protection of Rights of all migrant workers and members of their families. With this, we wish the delegation of Mongolia every success in the implementation of its human rights commitments. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I think you now invite the distinguished representative of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Georgia welcomes and thanks the delegation of Mongolia for the presentation of their measures. We acknowledge government's efforts to protect the rights of vulnerable groups, including children and persons with disabilities, and encourage government to further intensify relevant measures. We welcome the increase in social security spending by Mongolia and express hope that government continues measures aimed at fighting poverty and further strengthening of the social security system. With this in mind, we recommend to the government of Mongolia, first, to continue anti-corruption efforts, second, to continue measures aimed at protection of the rights of children, and third, to continue efforts aimed at harmonization of national legislation with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We wish the delegation of Mongolia very successful.
Thank you. I invite now the distinguished representative of Germany.
And Germany welcomes the delegation of Mongolia. Germany warmly welcomes the adoption and entry into force of the law on human rights defenders in 2021, the first of its kind in Asia, and encourages Mongolia to further build and nurture an environment conducive to the work of human rights defenders. Germany remains concerned about the protection of children's rights in Mongolia, especially in the context of child labor. Germany is furthermore concerned about the current legal environment regarding the press and media, as well as the serious challenges to the right to health due to air pollution in Mongolia's capital, Ulaanbaatar. Germany therefore recommends Mongolia to 1. Take further measures against child labor, as well as domestic and sexual violence against children. 2. Bring its long-standing work on a new media law to a conclusion based on international human rights standards and the general comments of the Human Rights Committee. And 3. Take urgent action in order to effectively remedy the situation of alarming air pollution, reducing the health risks caused by it. We wish Mongolia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank you. Now invite the distinguished representative of Iceland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and its national report. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Iceland recommends the following. 1. Strengthen enforcement of the law on combating domestic violence, including through training to effectively prevent and respond to sexual and gender-based violence. 2. Provide comprehensive access to quality sexual and reproductive health services across the country. 3. Strengthen comprehensive sexual education in and out of school settings. 4. Develop, enact, and enforce comprehensive legislation that criminalizes all forms of discrimination against persons of diverse societies. 5. Ensure thorough investigations of incidents of hate-motivated violence against persons of diverse societies, including through systematic data collection. 6. Ensure legal recognition of same-sex couples. 7. Ban conversion therapy. We wish Mongolia all success for its review. I thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. India warmly welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. We appreciate the adoption of the law establishing specialized courts in family and child matters, which is a significant milestone in advancing the protection of child's rights. We also note the measures to strengthen judicial independence and impartiality. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we recommend the following to Mongolia. 1. Strengthen efforts to combat human trafficking by allocating resources for preventive programs addressing root causes and enhancing protection and rehabilitation services for victims. 2. Implement targeted programs to combat gender-based violence, especially against women and girls with disabilities. And 3. Continue and expedite efforts to combat unemployment by strengthening access to technical and vocational training. We wish Mongolia a successful UPR review. Thank you.
I thank you, Ambassador. Dear colleagues, now I will give the floor to the delegation of Mongolia to address the observations and comments
that have been raised until now. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you, Member States, for your recommendations. And I'd like to now address some of the recommendations raised by a few Member States. If I may, I'd like to now switch to my mother tongue. So, translator, please be ready. Oops.
So on the right to live in the clean, the sustainable, so on the joint questions by Maldives, Slovenia, and Costa Rica. The Constitution of Mongolia and the 14 conventions that Mongolia is party to in this domain and within the total scope of 30 legislations. So we clearly stipulated the right of our people, according to international standards, to live in clean, sustainable environment through the intensifying the water supply and establishing 3 new water sources in 3 provinces. So the share of delivery of water resources to the population reached 82.9%. With the new project on a new sewage system, which is expected to be put into operations in 2027, will put in play a crucial role in reduction of the water pollution in the country. So the President of Mongolia initiated the Billion Tree campaign throughout the nation, which is going to play another crucial role in providing ecological balance and increasing the share of the forest area in the country. From 2021 up until 2030, this program is to be implemented in 3 stages and up to date, in total, 114.8 billion trees have been already planted with the purpose of promoting consumption of healthy food. So we have enacted the organic food law back in 2024. So within the scope of the healthy Mongolian citizen, so we are promoting the consumption of organic and healthy food. And in the past, we have established new 39 the food producing capacities. Secondly, with reference of Great Britain, a question on reduction of air pollution and ensuring right to live in a healthy and sustainable environment. So one of the important solutions to provide for reduction of air pollution is turning the districts into housing districts. So in order to reduce the air pollution sources, we are gradually shifting into electric heating and the strengthening the installation system and switching to the green heating sources. In total, the 17 point so the totally 12.10% of all the households are going to switch into liquid gas heating principles. And starting this October, we're introducing a semi-coking the briquette sources for the capital city heating purposes. So with that, progresses in place, we expect that the air pollution in Mongolia will reboot twofold. So with respect of housing project as the important effort. So in total by 2027, so about 5 to 6% of dwelling area will move into housing. So on the Belgian question on promotion of the political inclusiveness and participation of women at national and local levels. So according to the parliament election law of Mongol is so there was a quota of not less than 30%, and for the next parliament elections, the quota of not less than 40% of women participation has been clearly stipulated as a result of the recent elections. So we have elected 32 women out of 126 total number of parliaments. So which is the way high compared to the Asian average of 20.6%. Now, as it is stipulated in political parties law, so which talks about the quota of not less than 32% of the women representation. So now, we establish a quota for the by representation of any genders, and so this is how we implement the requirement of quota efficiently. As to the criminal code of Mongolia, it is prohibited to discriminate any person based on different race, religious views, educational level, and sex orientation and health conditions. And it's considered as a crime. So the women politicians, in the case of being fall as the victims of discrimination, they have a full access to obtain any health services. Now, as to the freedom of the present media and with respect of the protecting journalism rights that have been repeated in the many recommendations. Now, I would like to invite a colleague of mine, the State Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs, to answer this question. Thank you. The government of Mongolia to ensure the freedom of present media. So we have enacted the separate law since 1994. And in 2025, at the beginning of this year, so we have revised the law on the freedom of present media, and the draft has been submitted to the Parliament of Mongolia for further consideration. So the search for any information and access to information and release the information. So if in case of defamation based on these factors and intimidation cases, so this shall be criminally sanctioned and punished according to the criminal code. So therefore, the human rights defenders, journalists, and media and press representatives, if they are prosecuted and intimidated and harassed based on their views, so this case shall be regarded as a criminal case and the criminal sanctions will apply. However, so that's like mentioned on the present media the freedom law, in order to ensure more of liberty of journalists. So integrated the recommendations and comments of journalists and press and media representatives in order to come up with the very concept of this law. So if there's certain points of this law, the state shall not interfere into the content of any present media publishers, and the case of harassment and excuse me. So in relation to protection of the present media freedom, so we have a lot of provisions ensuring the freedom and access to the information. So the journalists and the present media has a full right to keep in secrecy the source of information they use.
And third, so in case of this misinterpretation of any information by present media, so that would be a subject to be considered by the present media industry self-governing organizations and mechanisms. So this is another specific of this law, to have a self-governing body in the present media industry. And also, so you mentioned about defamation and persecution of journalists based on the self-respect of freedom of expression. So in terms of defamation as a term, so so there is no the defamation of the definition of defamation in the French law. And so this defamation, notion of defamation has been already excluded from the French law in 2020. So only in the only thing that we have in the criminal code such a term as the dissemination of obvious false information. And this is it does not relate only to present media industry. This prohibition on the prohibition of dissemination of false information applies to every citizen of Mongolia, because every citizen shall enjoy the right to dignity and reputation from the very first day of its own existence. And if any act of defamation of dignity and reputation of the Mongolian citizen shall be legally. So now, along with the new the law on the freedom of press and media, so we're going to provide the clear comments focusing on definition of terms of and the subjects who would apply this laws. So in case of any person to be punished based on the dissemination of false information, then there would be a reference to the commentaries on the terms and the coverage of this definition. Thank you. Thank you, as Great Britain asked about our efforts on combating corruption and the independent status of the judiciary in fighting corruption. On corruption fighting, the Mongolian government is taking multiple measures, especially. So we are launching a very active engagement and collaboration with international legal institutions in the area of combating corruption and money laundering and asset return in collaboration with our partner of law enforcement organizations. So this is about asset return. So alongside. So there is the legal environment to return and recover in civil procedures the illicit assets accumulated by public service officials. And there is a draft law which has yet to be approved. And should this law be approved and enacted, we will have a clear legal framework to go for the confiscation of illicit assets generated by public officials. And according to the criminal code amendments, so introduced in 2022, we have removed the statute of limitation provision from the criminal code in the case of corruption cases. Even though the corruption cases are detected at the latest stage, we still have a room to impose criminal charges to the perpetrators of corruption cases. And of course, the draft law designed to tighten criminal sanctions for corruption in office cases is still under the process. And also, in order to combat corruption, we have initiated 5 efforts for those who escaped the criminal charges and who are escaping the process of asset return, etc. So the government of Mongolia will continue firmly their efforts to combat corruption and to fight against resistance to return these assets from abroad. On the other hand, in order to prevent from any act of corruption, especially in the mining industry, in the mineral extraction industry, so we have developing a draft law of the transparency in the extractive industry. And so which expects that the corporations operating in the mining extractive industries, when they apply for the operation licenses, they are obliged to provide in transparent manner. So every piece of information in relation with respect of the types of sources of their revenues and wealth. And this is the core concept of the transparency in extractive industry law. Also, in the area of combating corruption, in order to ensure the independence and impartiality of judiciary with respect of 2024 and the law on judiciary from 2021, so we have ensured the increase of the budgetary allocations to judiciary and to ensure the efficiency of human resource allocation. So in judiciary, so there is a whole set of the legislation that has been brought in place, and according to the amendment to the Constitution of Mongolia, so the disciplinary committee, the judiciary committee, and the general judicial council representatives mandate and the independence and impartiality and the accountability mechanism for judiciary representatives that have been established in through the amendments to the Constitution. Now, with respect of indictment issues by prosecutor's office, the statistical numbers, the prosecutions against corruption cases is increasing year by year. And so the criminal procedure law amendments. So now we provide for the transparency and openness of the life of the web stream of the court procedures for general public. And we consider that this is one of the measures taken by the government to make the process of combating corruption and office crimes is being transparent. So the Parliament is expecting to discuss the confiscation of illicit assets by public officers. Now on torture and ill treatment. So I would like to invite my colleague from Ministry of Justice and Home Affairs. Thank you. Mongolia is a party to the Convention Against Torture and Ill Treatment. So as a state member that we are taking every measures to prevent from and to combat and fight against torture and ill treatment, especially. Especially with respect of the definition stipulated in the criminal code. So this the definition is being redefined in line with the Convention on Torture and Ill Treatment. So we are going to make our national law definition in line with the definition of convention. So now, according to the international organization's recommendations, we are going to make this definition in line with the convention terms and definitions. Now, so for the, especially in the law enforcement of practices, especially with respect of the practices of interrogation and inspection. So we are going to introduce international standards, including the installing surveillance cameras in interrogation rooms, and and producing the audio and video records of the interrogation processes, and we apply the technological modified facilities in the interrogation rooms. So we have done 864 video and audio records as part of the that are publicly available. So, and for the for victims of the torture and the ill treatment, so they have a full right to hire a lawyer, so that if the victim is does not have any payment capacity, then the government shall provide the public attorney to protect the rights of the torture victims. So also the participant of the torture, they possible participants like the police and the investigators. So in case of committing this crime, they would be a subject of the special process of investigation by the special police unit in charge of investigating the special the law enforcement subject. So, and based on any complaints about the torture and ill treatment, the special investigation unit will be in charge of the investigating and prosecuting these cases. Thank you, State Secretary of Justice and Home Affairs. Now, the questions on LGBTQIP+. So on the questions on discrimination of this groups of society. Now I would like to invite the chair in charge of the Committee on Prevention from Crimes. Thank you. With respect to LGBT people, in order to remove stereotypes, especially so to make a U-turn in the attitude of the full law enforcement organizations, and to create a favorable environment for LGBT people to access the public services, we are taking the following measures. So where the operating one window service to respond to the demand and requirements of LGBT community. So the officers of the law enforcement organizations and the psychologists so have they conducted training on the awareness on the specifics of psychology of LGBT people. So we have done a training of trainers. at the same time, the police department has trained the 20 personnel to provide training services. And in total, 769 police officers have been trained as trainees. So with the joint with the LGBT NGO, so we also produced the guidance and the manual brochures for the purposes of educating police personnel. And so, depending on their differences and the gender orientation. So we are focusing on the specifics of mentality and psychology of these people, and especially so that also enables us to conduct a training for the special personnel like psychologists and the lawyers to protect the right of LGBT. So now the next the set of questions on the fight against domestic violence. Please. At 2025, the resolution of the Prime Minister of Mongolia, we have established the Anti-Domestic Violence National Committee comprising of the relevant institutions. And the committee is to work on the strengthening and the streamlining the efforts anti-domestic violence. So we have also developed a 5-year plan and a midterm program to fight domestic violence jointly with the NGOs. Now, as of current, so we operate the shelters of victims of domestic violence. So we operate 39 such shelters. And as of 2024, so we have provided services as of 2024 to 4,724 victims of domestic violence at the nationwide level. So we are the pursuing a policy of early detection of victims of domestic violence. And so for 764 the joint task forces, we employ more than 6,600 people to fight against domestic violence. 514 police officers are specialized in the issues of the domestic violence. And also, we have designated the special officers, totaling 770 officials who are specialized in child rights issues within the law enforcement organizations. The capacity building for the police officers for the purposes of capacity building, we have engaged with more than 500 police officers. So we've also in the curriculum of a bachelor degree of the internal troops university, we have introduced a special subject on the practices of interrogation of and taking a testimony of the victims of domestic violence, which combines theoretical and practical of subjects in order to improve the quality of legal counseling to the victims of domestic violence cases. Now, apart from the police officers, we engage with 150 lawyers and 230 prosecutors and plus another 200 medical officers to fight against domestic violence. Now, it is vitally important to provide, to offer a quality training to all these people. And every year, so we allocate a sufficient amount of budget and funds for the purposes of training of all the personnel for engaging the fight against domestic violence. Now, so the prevention from domestic violence, it is vitally important to launch an active public awareness campaign on an annual basis. So with introducing the frequent content, with the content and the full the HD movies and series of plays demonstrating the consequences of the domestic violence in order to improve public awareness on the negative impact and consequences of domestic violence cases. In recent months, so the technology-based, gender-based violence is taking place, and this is one of the amongst the issues that we attach a high priority to address. Thank you. So I think that time is really pressing on us. So I would like to focus now on the issues with the disabled people. So I would like to invite my colleague from the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Protection. Good afternoon. So the government of Mongolia, so there is working towards managing the law on the disabled people rights. So it is stipulated in Disabled Persons Convention. And so we have first introduced this law in 2016, and now we're to amend this law. And so we will introduce amendments when so within 2025, and these amendments will be submitted to the Parliament. Apart from these amendments to the law on disabled people, so we are going to introduce we've developed the first version of the disabled people's the language law, and so also the first version of accessibility and the inclusion of a disabled people law is in place. Thank you. Thank you. And some member states, they also focus on accessibility of the education of remote areas of children and the vulnerable groups children. So I would like to invite my colleague from education research institution. Good afternoon. So the government of Mongolia, for the purposes of improving the quality of education and accessibility, the government is taking took measures to increase the accessibility up to 98%, especially focusing on the providing for equal access and opportunity for remote area children, especially based on technology advancement. We are switching to the more flexible type of the education service delivery, which is the more of the beneficial for remote area and provincial children. Apart from that, so with the improvement of the capacity of dormitory and infrastructure of the school in the remote schools, so we have been able to remove the inequality in the education quality. So, but starting in 2023, so with a view to increase the number of teaching staff and the funding of the rural schools, now we observe a very significant improvement in the quality of education in remote areas. No, so the digital technology plays a crucial role in ensuring and improving the quality of the education services in remote areas. So it's not only about the school curriculum, but it's also after school activities of the accessibility. So, and for this purposes, also we have established digital schools, regardless of the remoteness or any location of any schools. So also digital schools would be a subject of further improvement in terms of improving the digital infrastructure and supply of digital devices to support the active educational process of rural children. Another indicator, another vulnerable groups children, so as the countries mentioned, from vulnerable groups. So one of the barriers and challenges they face, they don't have any financial sources to buy their school supplies. Now, so the government is providing free of charge school supplies to these children, and so also they provide free of charge the food provision services to this group of children. Now, it's not necessarily these people live in remote areas. It's not necessarily that people come from vulnerable groups. The same type of service apply to disabled children. So who should enjoy the equitable rights in enjoying quality education and enjoying the equal rights and possibilities to overcome the educational challenges. For that purpose, we have launched a new financial scheme for these children. Which resulted in the significant progresses in the quality of education, which is internationally recognized. So in 2025, with respect of schooling and education, Mongolia has been recognized as a nation of fast growth in education.
First intervention, please resume.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Interactive dialogue. And the first speaker is the English representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We should commend Mongolia for its continued engagement with BPR. We welcome Mongolia's efforts to enhance media freedom, improve law enforcement capacity, and strengthen engagement with civil society. Indonesia notes positively the reform of the National Human Rights Commission to align with the Paris principles. We also value Mongolia's commitment to ensure human rights in mining and development projects, as well as its initiatives to promote youth employment and improve livelihoods of herders. In this regard, Indonesia would like to offer the following recommendations. 1. Allocate adequate human, technical, and financial resources to the National Human Rights Commission to enable it to discharge its duties effectively and independently. 2. Continue efforts to combat torture and maltreatment by strengthening judicial independence and access to remedies without discrimination. 3. Strengthen legal reforms, in particular to address corruption, promote freedom of speech. Indonesia wishes Mongolia for success in its ongoing effort to promote human rights.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Islamic Republic of Iran expresses its appreciation of the distinguished delegation of the Mongolia for the presentation of international attention. Iran commends Mongolia for its continued efforts to promote and protect human rights and for constructive engagement in the review process. We also welcome the new legislative measures in support of the family and children protection. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Iran would like to offer the following recommendations. First, to continue its commendable efforts in promoting human rights education and ensuring inclusive access to educational and learning materials for all, especially in rural areas. Second, to further strengthen the protection of the rights of the child through supportive measures that enforce the role of the family and ensure age-appropriate and quality education. Third, to enhance women's participation in decision-making processes at all levels of governance. Iran wishes Mongolia very success in the implementation of these recommendations and its continued effort to promote and protect human rights. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا سيد نائب الرئيس.
Vice President, thank you. I'd like to welcome the delegation from Mongolia.
Significant efforts taken preparing this report. We recommend that for persons with disabilities and for children by stepping up efforts further to protect vulnerable groups. And we wish them every success this week.
Thank you. Now I invite the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ireland welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks it for its presentation today. Ireland acknowledges Mongolia's efforts to advance human rights domestically and commends progress made since the last UPR cycles. We welcome Mongolia's adoption of the National Action Plan to respect and protect human rights and prevent, identify and remedy human rights abuses committed in indigenous populations. Ireland expresses concern at the lack of comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation to protect the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons. Ireland is also concerned about the weakness of accountability mechanisms in environmental impact assessments and the absence of human rights and social impact assessments in energy, mining, heavy industry, transportation and infrastructure projects, given the public health impacts of severe air pollution. Ireland recommends that Mongolia 1. Enact comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation explicitly prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. 2. Ensure that effective human rights and environmental impact assessments and meaningful consultations with affected local communities are carried out in the process of granting permits for all energy, mining, heavy industry, transportation and infrastructure projects. 3. Strengthen legislative and governance frameworks on domestic violence prevention by enacting and fully implementing survivor-centered laws. We wish Mongolia every success in this UPR study.
I thank you. Now I invite the representative of
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the Mongolian delegation for its national report and for the efforts to improve the situation of children with disability and to strengthen gender equality. We strongly appreciate its active role in the global campaign against the death penalty. Italy offers Mongolia the following recommendations. 1. Raise the minimum age for evadus work, such as horse racing, and provide adequate training for child labor inspector and social work. 2. Consider expediting the adoption of a comprehensive law in relation between the state and religious institutions aimed at protecting the freedom of religion and belief enshrined in the Constitution. 3. Strengthen actions to safeguard the rights of vulnerable groups, including persons with disability, and support for persons with mental health conditions, in line with the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability. We wish Mongolia a successful review.
I thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Japan warmly welcomes the delegation of Mongolia to this session. Japan appreciates Mongolia's efforts to promote responsible business practices through the adoption of its national action plan and business in 2023. In spirit of constructive dialogue, Japan would like to make 3 recommendations. 1. Continue efforts to guarantee due process in law enforcement and ensure the impartiality and transparency of the judiciary. 2. Take further measures to promote gender equality in society, including measures to address gender-based violence in the distressed states. And 3. Take further measures to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities, including the establishment of systems aimed at their full social inclusion. We wish the delegation.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Jordan.
Delegation would like to welcome the delegation of Mongolia presiding over We wish the delegation every success during this UPR. Light of the we would like to state that my country appreciates the efforts to strengthen for vulnerable groups, in particular women and girls, and we have the measures taken to combat corruption
and to improve public management. We also hail measures taken to enhance environmental conditions and the support given to we recommend that pursue ethics and adopt national policy. The environment is provide an improvement of the standard of living of citizens. We are aware that the program when it comes to protect.
Thank you. Now have a video from the delegation of Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You welcome the UPR report. Kazakhstan notes with appreciation Mongolia's effort to strengthen democratic governance, promote gender equality, and ensure best and justice for all. In the spirit of constructive cooperation, we recommend Mongolia the following. First, continue to implement the 2030 Agenda for SDGs and ensure that these efforts pay attention to the implementation of international human rights obligations. Second, continue its efforts to strengthen national human rights institutions. Third, provide support to people with disabilities. We wish the delegation of Mongolia successful review.
Now invite the distinguished representative of the race. Donc maintenant, je passe la parole.
Luxembourg would like to thank Mongolia for presenting its national report. My delegation praises the efforts undertaken by Mongolia to promote human rights, particularly the progress, gender equality, and the inclusion of persons with disabilities. We also welcome initiatives aiming to strengthen access to justice and resilience to climate change. In a spirit of constructive collaboration, we recommend 1. Strengthen independence, impartiality, and transparency in the judicial system. 2. Guarantee the freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association, including the protection of journalists, human rights defenders, and civil society organizations against all forms of intimidation. Fully implement legislation on the prevention and fight against domestic and sexual violence, and this by improving the protection and support of victims and the funding of shelters. Lastly, reduce social and land inequalities by improving access to education, healthcare, including mental health, social protection, and decent work. I thank you.
Moi, je vous remercie, Madame la
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Nature commends Mongolia for the presentation of its national report and for its continued efforts to promote and protect human rights in the country in line with its international obligation. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Nature recommends the following. First, strengthen the policies and programs to enhance accessibility and social inclusion of persons with disabilities and older persons. Second, ensure effective implementation of the amended law on combating human trafficking with adequate resources and victim-centered protection. And third, enhance equitable access to maternal, child, adolescent healthcare services, especially in rural and remote areas. We wish Mongolia a successful.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
The Maldives warmly welcomes the delegation of Mongolia to its fourth cycle Universal Periodic Review and thanks the delegation for its comprehensive presentation. We commend Mongolia for the significant progress achieved in advancing gender equality and combating gender-based violence. We also welcome the 2023 amendment to the law on political parties introducing gender-balanced reporting requirements and note the positive steps taken to enhance women's representation in political and public life. The Maldives further acknowledges Mongolia's effort to strengthen social protection system, promote inclusive development, and integrate human rights consideration into environmental and climate policies, priorities that strongly resonate with our own national and multilateral commitments. In constructive spirit, the Maldives make the following recommendations. Continue efforts, including through the implementation of targeted programs to protect women and girls with disabilities from gender-based violence, in particular sexual violence. 2. Continue the work of advancing gender equality in the workplace by accelerating implementation of the national policy on making workplace gender sensitive and promoting measurable targets for women representation and safe working conditions. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now we have a video from the delegation of the Marshall Islands.
Thank you, Mr. President. Public of the Marshall Islands welcomes delegation of Mongolia. Thank you for the presentation of the report. We commend Mongolia for continued efforts to protect and promote children's rights. We welcome in particular the Republic of Mongolia to establish specialized courts dealing with family and child matters and approval earlier this year of regulations to protect children from exposure to harmful content. Furthermore, we are encouraged by the knowledge efforts to combat the climate crisis by increasing of knowledge as human right to inclusion for all children, especially those in this area. 3. Adopting the state. 4.
Now we have another video message from the delegation of Mauritius.
The Mauritius delegation extends a very warm welcome to the delegation of Mongolia to the title of the dialogue. We take a opportunity from Mongolia and the taking and implementing recommendations. We also commend the increasing involvement of the Parliament of Mongolia, the legislative program for the promotion and protection of human rights. In a constructive spirit, Mauritius recommends that Mongolia establishes a national mechanism for reporting, implementation, and follow-up, which includes all relevant stakeholders, including civil society, and adopt laws that would encompass its obligations under the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination. I wish Mongolia is successful. We thank you.
Okay, now I invite the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias. Vice President, we're grateful to Mongolia for introducing the report. We welcome the enactment of the law on childhood protection, as well as the ongoing cooperation with special procedures and the UN bodies. In a constructive, respectful spirit, Mexico recommended 1, adopt legislative and budgetary measures to ensure functional administrative and financial independence of the National Human Rights Commission, in step with the Paris Principles. 2, repeal Article 13, 14 of the Penal Code to make defamation and slander to be treated exclusively as civil affairs, and adopt effective legal frameworks that guarantee freedom of expression, including protection of journalists, media workers, and human rights. 3, standards, safeguards for best.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of Mongolia and its active participation in the UPR. We commend the Mongolian authorities for their continued efforts to improve the human rights record since the previous review. We recognize progress, including the revision of the law on the National Human Rights Commission, which strengthened its independence in line with the Paris Principles and established the legal status of the National Preventive Mechanism Against Torture. We also note legislative reforms to increase women's participation in politics and measures to expand social protection. At the same time, challenges remain, including persistent gender inequality, child labor, and concerns regarding freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. We also note the need for a comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. We encourage the authorities to continue implementing these reforms through inclusive dialogue, adequate resourcing, and effective follow-up to ensure tangible improvements in the enjoyment of human rights for all. Montenegro recommends to Mongolia, one, intensify efforts to effectively implement the law to combat domestic violence, including through training of all relevant professionals and strengthening victim support services. Two, provide the National Human Rights Commission with adequate human, technical, and financial resources to enable it to discharge its mandate effectively and independently. We wish Mongolia every success in the review. Thank you.
I thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Mr. Vice President, I wish to thank the distinguished delegation of Mongolia for the presentation of the national report, which reflects the importance of the efforts undertaken by the Mongolian government to strengthen and promote human rights. In particular, my delegation wishes to commend the legal and policy reforms undertaken by Mongolia to implement the recommendations of the third cycle of the UPR, particularly as they relate to interaction with UN human rights mechanisms. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, my delegation wishes to make the following recommendations. First, continue legal reforms aiming at preventing and combating violence against women and girls. Second, strengthen the capacities of the National Human Rights Institution, including through the provision of adequate human and dynamic resources. And third, consider establishing a national mechanism for implementation, reporting, and follow-up, taking into account the Marrakesh Guidance Framework on NMIRFs. In conclusion, Morocco extends its best wishes of success to the delegation of Mongolia in this review. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Mozambique.
Mr. Vice President, we thank you. Mozambique welcomes the high-level delegation from Mongolia and congratulates them for the presentation of the national reports under the first cycle of the UPR. We commend Mongolia for the significant progress made in the promotion and protection of human rights, in particular the adoption of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights 2023-2027, making Mongolia the first country in the Asia-Pacific region to implement such an instrument, and for the strengthening of women's representation in parliament through gender quotas, which with
Yeah. And promote rights of children, including the universal access to quality education. In a constructive spirit,
we offer Mongolia the following recommendation. 1. Continue measures to enhance the representation of women in the decision-making process. 2. Redouble efforts to eliminating discrimination, promoting equality, and reducing gender pay gap in the labor market. 3. Scale up efforts to mitigate the impacts of climate change and promote a smooth transition to clean and healthy environment. We wish Mongolia all success in its UPR. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of Mongolia for the presentation of its national report. The Netherlands commends the Mongolian government on advances in gender equality, resulting in more female parliamentarians taking office after the 2024 election. The Netherlands is concerned by recent attempts to hinder freedom of speech and further measures would be welcome to prevent Mongolia backsliding on the International Corruption Index. Therefore, the Netherlands recommends 1. Guarantee journalist rights to review Articles 13.14 and 19.11 of the Criminal Code, which pertain to information acquisition, and to stop prosecuting journalists using Article 17.6 in part. 2. To step up anti-corruption measurements, to report regularly on anti-corruption laws, and to prosecute all cases of corruption. The Netherlands wishes Mongolia every success with the follow-up of all recommendations that received during this UGR. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Norway commends Mongolia's efforts to strengthen legal protection of human rights defenders, to implement a national mechanism for the prevention of torture, and to adopt the 2022 law on labor and sexual harassment. However, Norway remains concerned about reports of corruption within the judiciary, limited transparency in legal proceedings, and insufficient access to legal aid for vulnerable groups. Norway recommends that Mongolia, 1. Intensify efforts to combat corruption within the judiciary by accelerating the implementation of the National Anti-Corruption Program. 2. Strengthen rule of law by ensuring access to legal aid and justice for vulnerable groups, including rural populations, women, persons with disabilities, and minorities. 3. Enhance the protection of girls and women from gender-based violence by adopting further measures to implement the prevention and response plan. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Oman.
شكرا نائب الرئيس. نرحب بوفد جمهورية المنغوليا.
Mr. President, we'd like to welcome Mongolia to their efforts in preparing the national report, adopting this bit of inclusive approach. We're grateful to the delegation also for their positive interaction with the UPR. We've taken note of the national report from Mongolia, summarizes the efforts made through care given to the elderly, services provided to them, including amending the law on older persons in 2024. Our recommendations are as follows. 1, support efforts for greater access to education for disabled children and provide them an appropriate educational environment, one consistent with their needs. Secondly, launch further national initiatives to combat air pollution and protect the environment through outreach campaigns. Thirdly, bolster participation of women at a political level, ensure their access to decision-making posts. We wish Mongolia a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Paraguay.
Mr. Presidente,
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Mongolia. We thank them for the report. We welcome efforts made to implement the recommendations from the last cycle and normative, institutional and political progress as detailed in the report. We regret the dissolving of the National Human Rights Committee, which was acted as a national implementation, reporting and follow-up to recommendation mechanism for the human rights. We respectfully recommend 1, consider ratifying the International Convention on Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and their families. 2, strengthen institutional, normative and political mechanisms for preventing, combating and sanctioning human trafficking, and intensify outreach and awareness-raising measures, as well as access for victims to justice and support services, especially for women and girls. 3, strengthen the institutional, normative and political public framework to prevent and sanction sexual and domestic violence against women, as well as in providing adequate support services for victims. 4, restore the national implementation, reporting and follow-up mechanism for human rights recommendations and consider the possibility of receiving cooperation to that end. 5, provide an open standing invitation for 2 mandate holders to be able of special procedures to be able to visit the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Philippines.
Mr. Vice President, the Philippines welcomes the esteemed delegation of Mongolia to this UPR session. We commend Mongolia's determined efforts to enhance children's rights protection mechanisms, such as the establishment of specialized family and child courts in June 2024, and the reinstatement of the Child Money Program, one of Asia's most progressive child benefit systems. We further welcome the increase of women representation in Mongolia's parliament following the 2024 election. In a constructive spirit, we offer the following recommendations. 1, reinforce measures to protect the rights of migrant workers, including by ratifying the Migrant Workers Convention. 2, ensure the effective enforcement of the law on combating human trafficking as amended in 2024, and a Digital Nation Mongolia strategy, particularly in the areas of victim identification and prosecution of cases, including those perpetrated with the use of digital platforms. And consider integrating human rights education in the formal education system, as well as in professional development programs for law enforcement and the judiciary. We wish Mongolia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Poland.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Poland thanks Mongolia for the presentation of its national report and for the constructive participation in the UPR process. We acknowledge efforts undertaken by Mongolia to implement the recommendations accepted during the previous cycle of the UPR. We welcome in particular further measures strengthening the protection of the rights of persons in vulnerable situations, especially children and persons with disabilities, which was recommended by Poland to Mongolia during the previous cycle. Poland recommends Mongolia to 1. Continue efforts to strengthen the protection of the rights of women, in particular in the context of victims of domestic violence, as well as the rights of children and persons with disabilities. 2. Ensure the full enjoyment of the right to freedom of expression, in particular for human rights defenders and journalists, providing them with a safe environment to conduct their legitimate activities. And 3. Continue efforts to eradicate torture and ill treatment and to ensure independent and transparent investigations into all allegations of such acts. We wish Mongolia a successful review. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Mr. Vice President, Portugal welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We welcome the steps undertaken to promote gender equality, notably through the introduction of quotas, increasing women's representation in Parliament, as well as the decision to establish specialized family and juvenile courts. We also take positive note of Mongolia's progress in protecting LGBTI persons and the strengthening of the judiciary's institutional capacities. Portugal respectfully recommends that Mongolia strengthens the policies that support women's economic empowerment, inter alia by facilitating women entrepreneurs' access to credit, expanding affordable care services, and implementing employment programs that reduce the burden of unpaid care work. Takes effective measures to guarantee freedom of expression and media freedom, including by preventing arbitrary detention, intimidation, and harassment of journalists, media workers, and human rights defenders. Strengthens and ensures the effective functioning of a national mechanism for implementation, reporting, and follow-up, NMRF. Portugal wishes Mongolia a successful review. Thank you.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Qatar. And as I see none, then I will give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. Vice President, the Republic of Korea commends Mongolia for its continued efforts to implement the recommendation received during the third cycle, including measures to advance women's rights and increase the representation of women in parliament. We also note Mongolia's implementation of several policy frameworks aimed at eradicating child labor, along with ongoing child rights inspections to safeguard the rights of children. With this progress in mind, we would like to present the following recommendations to Mongolia. 1. Continuing efforts to reduce air pollution and accelerate the introduction of energy-efficient heating systems and environmentally friendly energy sources with a view to ensuring the full enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights by the population. 2. Ensure freedom of expression and media freedom by aligning national legislation with ICCPR and by guaranteeing the journalists and human rights defenders can work freely and carry out their legitimate activities without fear or undue interference. 3. Take appropriate measures to ensure universal access to digital technology for all persons with disabilities in order to bridge the digital divide. We wish Mongolia a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the distinguished representative of the Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Republic of Moldova thanks the distinguished delegation of Mongolia for the presentation of their national report. We would like to highlight the efforts of the government of Mongolia to increase spending on social security, enhance women's political participation, and combat air pollution by promoting more environmentally friendly heating systems. We encourage the continuation of these policies and further advancement in achieving sustainable results. In a spirit of constructive engagement, we would like to make the following recommendations. First, strengthen the measures aimed at combating domestic violence, including by effectively implementing the law to combat domestic violence and by allocating sufficient fund. Second, undertake further efforts to combat corruption, including by granting sufficient resources to the national bodies and ensure transparency of the cases transferred to the courts. Third, accede to the convention related to the state of stateless persons and the convention on the reduction of statelessness. We wish the delegation of Mongolia every success in its EPR review. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Romania.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Romania welcomes the delegation of Mongolia and appreciates the legislative and institutional efforts in the field of human rights since the last review. We note in particular positive developments related to gender equality, consolidation of the judiciary, and the rights of the child. We commend the cooperation with the UN human rights mechanisms in the reporting period. Romania encourages Mongolia to continue these positive trends, and in this regard, we would like to make the following recommendations. Accelerate efforts to effectively implement the law to combat domestic violence and develop a comprehensive national action plan in this regard. Continue efforts to establish an effective and well-functioning juvenile justice system in compliance with international standards. Romania wishes Mongolia success in this UPR cycle. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
I thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Mongolia. We thank them for the report. We would commend the specific efforts of Mongolia to follow up on the recommendations from the third UPR. In that context, we welcome the review of legislation with a goal for more effectively reflecting the provisions of national human rights treaties in the national system. We recommend harmonizing national legislation with international human rights standards. Separately, we'd like to highlight the country's constructive cooperation with the treaty bodies. We welcome the steps of the government to promote and protect rights and freedoms of vulnerable segments of the population, including women, children, the elderly and the disabled. We recommend work continues to ensure protection in legislation and in practice of the rights of the aforementioned vulnerable groups of the population. We also commend the measures to improve the functioning of the penitentiary system. We recommend continuing taking measures to address the problem of prison overcrowding. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. Vice President, Sierra Leone welcomes the distinguished delegation of Mongolia and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. We commend Mongolia for its ongoing dedication to promoting human rights and democratic governance. We acknowledge Mongolia's legal guarantee of 12 years of free primary and secondary education, demonstrating a strong national prioritization of the right to education. We also appreciate the availability of public pre-primary education for children aged 3 to 5 to ensure that every child benefits from early learning opportunities. We commend Mongolia for its efforts to strengthen anti-corruption measures through legal reforms and national action plans, and the efforts to enhance press freedom and gender equality. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we offer the following recommendations. 1, consider amending the national laws to guarantee at least 1 year of free pre-primary education in line with international human rights standards. 2, take concrete measures to ensure that rural and nomadic communities have equal access to free education at all levels. 3, strengthen the implementation and monitoring mechanisms to ensure full compliance with the new anti-corruption laws and action plans. Sierra Leone wishes Mongolia a successful review. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Now I invite the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Slovenia commends the delegation of Mongolia for the comprehensive national report presented today and acknowledges its ongoing commitment to the UPR process. Slovenia attaches great importance to gender equality and welcomes the progress made by Mongolia in advancing women's rights. However, we know that women continue to be underrepresented in public and political spheres. In this regard, Slovenia recommends to Mongolia to consider adopting additional legislative measures and initiatives to promote substantive equality for women, particularly in decision-making process and leadership roles, and to improve access to education and healthcare for women in rural areas. Slovenia further recommends to Mongolia to intensify efforts to eradicate child labor and to enhance access to quality education for all children, with particular attention to those in nomadic and rural communities. We acknowledge the measures taken by the government of Mongolia to protect children's rights. However, concerns remain regarding the continued engagement of children in hazardous work, especially in the mining and agriculture. We wish Mongolia every success in the UPR process. I thank you.
I thank you. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Thank you, Vice President. Spain welcomes the delegation of Mongolia, and we thank them for their participation in this UPR as well as the presentation made. Spain congratulates Mongolia for approving in 2021 the law on legal status of human rights defenders and the law on child protection of 2024. In a constructive spirit, Spain would make the following recommendations. 1, improve dissemination and implementation of the law on the legal status of human rights defenders, including when it comes to complaints being brought before the Human Rights Defenders Committee. 2, adopt a normative framework addressing the social and negative environmental impact of mining activities in water sources and land, as well as upholding the rights of nomadic pastoral communities. 3, effectively implement the law against domestic violence with specialized tribunals on gender-based violence, providing care services for survivors of GBV, as well as putting together a sex offenders register. Thank you.
Thank you. Maintenant, je passe la parole au
Give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Vice-président,
Vice President, Switzerland welcomes the delegation from Mongolia and makes the following recommendations. 1. Align legislation on defamation and disinformation with Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and with the General Comment number 34 of the Human Rights Committee on Article 19. 2. Guarantee a free, independent media environment free from political or economic pressure. 3. Strengthen the implementation of laws against domestic violence and towards LGBTI persons, in particular in rural areas, through awareness-raising campaigns and by training the police and other stakeholders involved. 4. Promote the comprehensive implementation of laws against all type of discrimination, so as to protect all vulnerable groups, including persons from the LGBTI community. The aim is to guarantee rapid and impartial inquiries into hate crimes and to train the authorities and public agents. Thank you.
Je vous remercie. Maintenant,
I thank you. We have now reached the end of the list of speakers. I'd now like to give the floor to the delegation of Mongolia to make concluding remarks and comments, and also in relation to the responses provided during the statements made. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for the member states for the recommendation. Since during the first intervention, we covered most of the recommendations by member states, so I'd like to use a few minutes to address some of the comments and recommendations made by some of the member states. So I'll switch to my mother tongue.
On UPR and human rights mechanisms, some member states' recommendations. The government of Mongolia, with respect of the recommendations of the Human Rights Council, so the government has already developed and approved the General Action Plan for implementation. So we have submitted three times of the national report on UPR, and the current one is a fourth one. And also in 2024, the Parliament of Mongolia employed a special working group that aiming to improve the quality of the implementation of recommendations and to streamline the Parliament oversight of the implementation of all this recommendation and identify the certain measures to be taken in order to improve the outcome of these recommendations. The Parliament of Mongolia had produced a special resolution integrating the availability of additional human and financial resources for these purposes. Now, so the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mongolia, with respect of the UPR and other mechanism, and with in order to they ensure the quality implementation of the recommendation, the Minister of Foreign Affairs operates as the general coordinator. So, and in 2023, we have established full-time structure to be in charge of coordination to ensure the implementation of recommendations. And so also we operate the government, the specialized monitoring and evaluation agency, which is going to function as a core organization to be in charge of the implementation of the UPR recommendations. Now, with respect of the German and Italy representatives on child jockey rights and the measures taken to improve the situation, I would like to invite my colleague from the Ministry of Family, Labor and Social Protection. In 2024, according to the Child Protection Law of 2024, so so we identify the children who live in the risky circumstances, and we have introduced a special legal regulation to identify to address this problem. So this should we integrate the
шинжилэн хууль
So now, so for the child jockeys, so with respect with the right to life, to the safe and secure so we have introduced a number of legal amendments. For example, in 2024 and the national of the festival, the age limitation, which used to be 7 years old, so that been upgraded up to 8 years. So especially with the revision of the 2024 of child right protection, so we have introduced a new provision with respect of the rights of the children during pre-test, contest, and competition of the horse race, and during the horse race. So we exercise. So there is a mechanism to exercise a monitoring of the process of horse racing. So the accident insurance is a must. The annual accident insurance is a must for all the trainees and the organizers of horse racing. Now, apart from this legal provisions, the government of Mongolia has, due to extreme the climate conditions, so in order to reduce the risk of the child jockeys, the period of 1st of November through the May of 1st of May, so therefore underage children, the horse racing activities are totally prohibited. So and during the National Grand Festival, this Grand Festival is regarded as a manly of 3 sports and festivals, which for the centuries used to be considered as a long-lasting tradition, and the horse racing is one of the form of this historical traditional heritage of Mongolia, which has been recorded by UNESCO as the World Heritage. So therefore, we're attaching a high priority to introducing the international best practice-based the workwear standards for the child jockeys. On top of what my colleagues said, so I would like to emphasize on some recommendations produced by some member states with respect of protection of disabled people, and so to eliminate all forms of discrimination of the older persons. So I would like to invite my colleague to elaborate on the situation with the older persons. Now, in 2017, Mongolia had approved and enacted the law on older persons. During this reporting period, so we are focusing on establishing the demand-driven service delivery for older persons. So and now, so we have introduced amendments in order to ensure the comprehensive package of services to the older persons, so including assistance and the public services with respect to ensuring the disabled person's rights. So that to inline certain provisions of the laws, so we're introducing certain provisions amending relevant provisions of the law since 2021. And especially in 8 provinces, we have established the disabled the older persons, the economic activities centers, and so we also introduced the centers to provide the physical therapy, mental therapy, and other type of health services to disabled children. Now, so also we've initiated the civil construction work to establish a center to provide these services to the disabled people. Now, thank you. So the island and Spanish, of our colleagues mentioned that Mongolia is the livestock country. So you've raised a question about the mining activities in rural areas. So my colleague will answer this question. Thank you. So one of the factors which changed the original landscape is of any country's mining operations. So according to the mining law of Mongolia, for any extractive projects, the industry needs to obtain an operational license to operate these mines. Now these license holders have legal obligations to meet according to laws. And so what entails a thorough environmental and social impact assessment to be done prior to starting any mining operations on these deposits. On the other hand, so this impact assessment shall be a subject of the collective, the local community discussion and approval for the mining operations to start. So the community will be comprised of the herding the segments of society. So the herders themselves will decide whether these mining extractive operations are to take place in the localities based on the profile of the environmental and social impact assessment. This is what law requires the mining operators to comply with. Now, so indeed, so we have the further plans with the Ministry of Mining to introduce new say paragraphs and articles in the mining law in order to ensure the much transparency in extractive industry. Now there's the law on the transparency of extractive industry will focus on the environmental, on social impact assessment along with the environmental impact assessment. So the social impact assessment would entail the very close collaboration with the local communities in terms of enabling the community to benefit from the economic impact of this mining projects. In other words, so the social impact assessment will guarantee that any compensation for any damages, environmental damages, will be compensated and redressed. Thank you. Now on human trafficking, the measures and efforts on human trafficking raised by a number of member states. So I would like to invite the chair of the Committee on Prevention from Crimes. In the Criminal Code of Mongolia, we have a we have a definition on human trafficking in line with international convention definitions. So from the compensation or reparation fund, we make reparations available to the victims of human trafficking crimes. Now, so also we have approved the regulation on providing a legal counseling and assistance to the victims of human trafficking, and for the underage victims and the vulnerable groups, so we provide free of charge legal counseling services. Also, so about the prosecution of human trafficking cases, so we have conducted the 44 specialized training to engaging 153 judges, 168 prosecutors, and 482 police officers. Altogether, 972 personnel have been involved in this training. Thank you. Thank you. As the Russian Federation delegate mentioned about the correction facility capacity of and prisons capacity, I would like to invite my colleague from the Court Decision Implementation Agency. Good afternoon. Now, as of current, the correction facilities and so in the temporary of the correction facility, we don't have any excess, the excess of existing capacity. Now, yet we have a certain list of requirements for the correction facilities and the prisons in terms of the square meter, standard square meters per the prisoner per person. So the same standards we have in terms of the nutrition, the calories, and the amount of the food for daily consumption. So our organization, all the correctional facilities and prisons are subject of a daily monitoring of the prosecutor's office and the specialized organizations. On the other hand, the criminal, the sanction policy has been revised recently in Mongolia. So, and for those who commit crimes for the first time, so they would fall under the regulations would under the sanction other than imprisonment. So, and which resulted in a reduction of the number and statistics of imprisoned personnel.
Member states. With that, we hope we have covered most of the recommendations today. And as we are nearing the end of the review of Mongolia's fourth national report, on behalf of the government of Mongolia, it is my privilege to express our sincere gratitude to all the delegates for their active engagement today and valuable comments on the progresses and challenges and recommendations on ensuring and protection of human rights for a forthcoming 5 years. And this is to express our firm commitment, on one hand, to follow with your recommendations, and on the other hand, as a member state to human rights treaties and conventions, to ensure compliance with our obligations in order to attain substantial improvement and tangible results. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary of State, and congratulations to the whole delegation for the thorough approach to the comments made and the recommendations raised. So once again, we thank the delegation of Mongolia for the presentation and the participation in this review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of Brazil, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Vietnam. In accordance with the procedure implemented in 2015, the recommendation section of the report is scheduled for distribution on Friday, 7th of November at 12:30 p.m. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that according to the Council's decision on measures to conserve time and financial resources, adopted at its organizational meeting on the 2nd of June this year, 2025, the recommendation section of the working group reports will be considered for adoption on 14th of November as from 2:30 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on Friday, 21st of November. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for the review of Panama. The speaking time will be 1 minute and 20 seconds for all. Inscribed speakers who wish to withdraw from the list are kindly invited to use the online system event for withdrawals at least 30 minutes before the start of the review. And now I close the fourth meeting of the 50th session of the UPR Working Group. Have a nice evening.